Have you ever had that moment when your entire world just stops? When everything you thought was solid suddenly feels like it's crumbling beneath your feet? That's exactly what happened to me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a message that would change my life forever. My sister Emma, a commercial airline pilot, had just sent me 3 words that made my blood run cold. We need to talk. I was standing in my kitchen, stirring a pot of soup for dinner, thinking about how I would surprise my husband Michael when he returned from his business trip to London. He had been gone for 5 days, and I missed him terribly. We had been married for 7 years, and even after all this time, being apart from him felt like missing a piece of myself. I had planned a special evening, his favorite meal, candles, and maybe even that expensive wine we had been saving for a special occasion. Little did I know that the special occasion I was planning would never happen, at least not in the way I had imagined. When I saw Emma's message, my heart skipped a beat. Emma wasn't the dramatic type. She was practical, straightforward, and always measured in her words. If she said we needed to talk, it meant something serious. I immediately called her back, my hands trembling slightly as I pressed her name on my screen. She answered on the first ring, and the tone of her voice told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. There was hesitation there, pain, and something else that sounded like anger mixed with sympathy. "Sarah," she began, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "I'm so sorry to tell you this, but I just landed in Paris, and I saw Michael on my flight. He was in business class." I felt confused for a moment. Michael had told me he was flying to London for a conference, not Paris, and he always flew economy because his company was strict about travel expenses. But before I could process this information, Emma continued, and her next words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "Sarah, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, and they looked very comfortable together, too comfortable." The room started spinning. I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. The soup on the stove continued to bubble, oblivious to the fact that my life was falling apart. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand that Emma tell me she was mistaken, that maybe it was someone who just looked like Michael. But deep down, in that terrible place where we keep the truths we don't want to acknowledge, I knew she wasn't wrong. Emma had excellent vision. She was detail-oriented, and most importantly, she would never joke about something like this. "Are you absolutely sure it was him?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Emma's response was immediate and firm. "I'm 100% sure, Sarah. I walked past his seat twice. He was sleeping with his head on her shoulder, and she was stroking his hair. They had that look, you know, the one that couples have when they're intimate. I wanted to confront him right there, but I was in uniform and didn't want to cause a scene. Plus, I thought you should know first." My mind raced through the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Had Michael been acting differently? Were there clues I had ignored because I trusted him so completely? I thought about the extra hours he claimed he was working, the new cologne he had started wearing, the way he had become more protective of his phone. Little things that I had brushed off as normal behavior now seemed to glow like warning signs in my memory. How could I have been so blind? "What did she look like?" I asked, hating myself for wanting to know but unable to stop myself. Emma paused, clearly uncomfortable with the question, but she answered honestly. "She was younger, maybe late 20s, blonde hair, wearing expensive clothes. They had matching luggage tags, Sarah, the kind that couples get together." That detail hit me harder than anything else. Matching luggage tags meant this wasn't a one-time thing, a moment of weakness or a terrible mistake. This was planned, organized, and ongoing. This woman was part of his life in a way that required coordination and intention. I thanked Emma, told her I needed time to think, and ended the call. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the life I thought I had built. The photos on the refrigerator from our last vacation, the wedding picture hanging in the hallway, the coffee mug he had given me last anniversary with the words, "My forever love," printed on it. Everything suddenly felt like a lie, a beautiful facade hiding an ugly truth. The soup burned on the stove, filling the kitchen with a bitter smell that seemed appropriate for the moment. Michael wasn't supposed to return for 3 more days. 3 more days in Paris with this woman, while I waited at home like a fool, preparing celebrations for a man who was betraying me. The anger started to rise then, hot and fierce, pushing aside the shock and hurt. I wasn't going to sit here and wait for him to come home with more lies. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know and give him the chance to gaslight me or manipulate me with explanations that would insult my intelligence. No, I was going to take control of this situation. I spent the entire night sitting on my couch, staring at the walls, my mind working through 1,000 different scenarios. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael with this mystery woman, laughing, holding hands, sharing intimate moments that should have belonged to me. By the time the sun rose, I had made several decisions. First, I wasn't going to confront him over the phone or through text messages. He deserved to see my face when I revealed that I knew the truth. Second, I was going to gather evidence because if this marriage was ending, I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. And third, I was going to find out exactly who this woman was and how long this had been going on. I called in sick to work, which was easy enough since I actually felt physically ill. My stomach was in knots, and I had developed a pounding headache that no amount of pain medication could touch. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I logged into our shared laptop and started going through Michael's emails. I felt dirty doing it, like I was violating his privacy. But then I remembered that he had already violated something far more sacred than privacy. He had violated our marriage vows, our trust, and the life we had built together. If looking through his emails made me feel guilty, it was nothing compared to what he had done. What I found made everything so much worse. There were emails going back 6 months, filled with romantic messages, plans for secret meetings, and discussions about a future together. Her name was Natalie, and she worked for the same company as Michael, in the Paris office. They had met during a business trip last year, and according to their messages, they had fallen deeply in love. Michael wrote to her in ways he hadn't written to me in years, calling her his soulmate, his true love, the woman he should have waited for. Reading those words felt like being stabbed repeatedly, each message a fresh wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. But the worst part was discovering that this trip to Paris wasn't about business at all. Michael had used vacation days he had told me he was saving for a special trip we would take together for our anniversary. Instead, he was using them to spend a romantic week with Natalie, staying at a luxury hotel near the Eiffel Tower, doing all the things we had talked about doing together someday. They had dinner reservations at expensive restaurants, tickets to the opera, and plans to visit the Louvre. He was living out our dream vacation with another woman, and I was sitting at home like an idiot, waiting for him to return so I could welcome him with open arms. I printed out everything, every email, every romantic message, every piece of evidence that proved his betrayal. My printer worked overtime, spitting out page after page of documentation that would soon become ammunition in what I knew would be an ugly divorce. As I watched the papers pile up, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and painful, but it was being joined by something else: determination. I wasn't going to be a victim in this story. I was going to take charge and make sure that Michael understood the consequences of his actions. Next, I called my best friend Rachel, who was a lawyer specializing in family law. I had been a bridesmaid at her wedding, she had been the maid of honor at mine, and we had been friends since college. If anyone would understand what I was going through and help me navigate this nightmare, it would be Rachel. When I told her everything, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then she spoke, her voice filled with a fury that matched my own. "That absolute bastard," she said, and I could hear her already shifting into professional mode. "Sarah, I'm coming over right now, and we're going to make sure you're protected. Don't delete anything, don't confront him yet, and whatever you do, don't let him know that you know. We need to be strategic about this." Rachel arrived within an hour, carrying her briefcase and a bag of pastries that she knew I loved. She gave me a long hug, letting me cry on her shoulder for a few minutes before we got down to business. We spread all the printed emails across my dining room table, and she went through them methodically, making notes and asking questions. She wanted to know about our finances, our assets, whether we had a prenuptial agreement, which we didn't, and what I wanted the outcome to be. Did I want to try to save the marriage, or was I ready to end it? The answer came easily. After reading those emails, after seeing how deeply Michael had invested in this other relationship, I knew there was no coming back from this. Our marriage was over. Rachel explained my options in clear, practical terms. We could file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, which in our state would give me certain advantages in the settlement. We would need to secure our bank accounts, document all our shared assets, and make sure that Michael couldn't hide money or property during the divorce proceedings. She also suggested that I might want to consider hiring a private investigator to document Michael and Natalie together, which would provide even stronger evidence if we needed it. I agreed to everything, feeling like I was moving through a terrible dream where I was watching myself make decisions that would dismantle my entire life. While Rachel made phone calls to set things in motion, I sat at the kitchen table and thought about how we had gotten here. Michael and I had met at a friend's party 9 years ago. He had been charming, funny, and attentive, everything I had been looking for in a partner. Our courtship had been romantic, filled with long conversations, surprise dates, and declarations of eternal love. When he proposed on a beach at sunset, I had believed with my whole heart that we would be together forever. Now I wondered if any of it had been real, or if I had been fooling myself from the very beginning. The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Rachel had connected me with a private investigator named David, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who had seen too many stories like mine. He assured me that he would be discreet and professional, and that he would get me the documentation I needed. He flew to Paris that same evening, armed with photos of Michael and the address of the hotel where he was staying with Natalie. Meanwhile, I had to continue pretending that everything was normal, responding to Michael's occasional text messages with cheerful replies that made me feel sick to my stomach. Michael had texted me pictures of London landmarks, claiming he was having productive meetings, but missing me terribly. Each message was a lie, carefully constructed to maintain the illusion of a faithful husband on a business trip. I responded with heart emojis and messages about how much I missed him too, all while sitting surrounded by evidence of his betrayal. The duplicity required to maintain this charade was exhausting, but Rachel insisted it was necessary. We didn't want Michael to suspect anything until we were ready to strike. The element of surprise would be our greatest advantage. David worked quickly and efficiently. Within 24 hours, he had sent me dozens of photographs that removed any lingering doubt I might have had. There was Michael and Natalie holding hands as they walked along the Seine River, kissing in front of the Eiffel Tower, feeding each other dessert at a candlelit restaurant, and entering their hotel room with their arms wrapped around each other. Each photo was a dagger to my heart, but I forced myself to look at all of them. I needed to see the truth in its entirety, no matter how painful it was. I needed to kill whatever remaining hope I had that this was somehow a misunderstanding, or that our marriage could be saved. One photograph in particular caught my attention. It showed Michael and Natalie at what appeared to be a jewelry store, looking at rings together. The implication was clear and devastating. He wasn't just having an affair, he was planning a future with her. Perhaps he was planning to divorce me and marry Natalie, or maybe he was living some fantasy where he could have both of us. Either way, it showed a level of commitment to this other relationship that went far beyond a simple affair. This was a complete betrayal of everything we had built together, a systematic dismantling of our marriage while I remained oblivious at home. Rachel reviewed all the evidence and declared that we had more than enough for the divorce proceedings. She had already drafted the initial paperwork, and we had set up a separate bank account in my name only, transferring half of our savings to protect my interests. She had also advised me to change the locks on our house, which I did the day before Michael was scheduled to return. It felt strange, standing in my own home, knowing that my husband would no longer have a key, but it also felt necessary. This was my space now, my sanctuary, and I wasn't going to allow him to walk back in as if nothing had happened. I also called my parents and told them everything. My mother cried on the phone, not just for the end of my marriage, but for the pain I was experiencing. My father, who had always liked Michael and treated him like a son, was furious. He wanted to fly down immediately and confront Michael himself, but I convinced him to stay where he was. This was something I needed to handle on my own, in my own way. I appreciated their support, but I didn't want this to turn into a family drama. This was between Michael and me, and I wanted to face him with dignity and strength, not surrounded by angry relatives. Emma called me every day to check on how I was doing. She felt guilty for being the messenger who had delivered such terrible news, but I assured her that I was grateful. If she hadn't told me, I might have gone on for months or even years being deceived, wasting more of my life on a man who didn't deserve my love or loyalty. She offered to be there when I confronted Michael, but I declined. Like I had told my parents, this was something I needed to do alone. I needed to look him in the eyes and tell him that I knew everything, and I needed to see his reaction without any distractions. The night before Michael was scheduled to return, I barely slept. I went over everything in my mind, planning what I would say and how I would say it. I wanted to be calm and controlled, not hysterical or emotional. I wanted him to see that I was strong, that I wasn't going to fall apart or beg him to stay. Rachel had advised me to keep the conversation short and focused, to not let him manipulate me with excuses or apologies. The divorce papers were ready to be served, and a process server would be coming to the house shortly after Michael arrived. Everything was in place. I spent that final night walking through our house, looking at all the things we had collected together over the years. The furniture we had picked out, the paintings we had bought on trips, the photographs documenting our life together. Each item held memories that now felt tainted by his betrayal. I wondered what would happen to all of these things during the divorce. Would we split them up, dividing our shared history into his pile and my pile? Would I want to keep any of it, or would everything serve as a painful reminder of what I had lost? These practical questions helped distract me from the emotional turmoil I was feeling. I also wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about how I was feeling, about the anger and hurt and sense of betrayal that consumed me. I wrote about the future I had imagined with Michael, the children we had talked about having, the house we had planned to buy, the retirement we would spend traveling the world together. All of those dreams were dead now, killed by his selfishness and deception. But I also wrote about hope, about the possibility of rebuilding my life without him, about finding happiness again, even though it seemed impossible in that moment. Michael's flight was scheduled to land at 3 in the afternoon, and he had texted me that he would be home by 5. I spent the entire day preparing myself mentally for the confrontation. I took a long shower, dried my hair, and put on one of my best outfits. I wanted to look put together, strong and confident, not like a woman who had been crying for days. I applied makeup carefully, covering the dark circles under my eyes and adding just enough color to my cheeks to look healthy. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked calm and composed, but inside I was a storm of emotions waiting to break free. Rachel had wanted to be present during the confrontation, but I had insisted on doing this alone. However, she was waiting at a coffee shop just 2 blocks away, ready to come if I needed her. The process server was also on standby, ready to deliver the divorce papers as soon as I gave him the signal. Everything was choreographed down to the minute, a carefully planned operation designed to catch Michael completely off guard. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the shock and devastation that I had felt when Emma first told me the truth. At exactly 5:15, I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I positioned myself in the living room, sitting on the couch with my hands folded in my lap, trying to appear calm, even though every nerve in my body was screaming. I heard his key slide into the lock, heard him try to turn it, and then heard his confused grunt when the lock didn't open. He tried again, jiggling the key, probably thinking it was stuck. Then he knocked on the door, calling out my name with a mixture of confusion and slight irritation. I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. Michael stood there with his suitcase beside him, his expression shifting from confusion to concern when he saw my face. He immediately started to speak, asking why the lock wasn't working and if something was wrong with the door. I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in, but I didn't help him with his luggage. He dragged his suitcase into the hallway, still talking about the lock, still completely oblivious to what was about to happen. It was almost funny in a dark way, watching him act so normal when his entire world was about to explode. "Sarah, is everything okay?" he asked, finally picking up on the tension in the air. He reached out to hug me, but I stepped back, putting distance between us. His arms dropped to his sides, and I saw the first flicker of real concern cross his face. "What's wrong? Did something happen while I was gone?" The audacity of that question, the casual way he pretended to care, made the anger that I had been carefully controlling start to rise. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm, to stick to the plan. "How is Paris?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. I watched as the color drained from his face. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. In that moment of silence, I saw everything I needed to see: the guilt, the panic, the desperate scrambling to come up with an explanation. He didn't even try to deny it immediately, which told me that he knew he had been caught and that lying would be pointless. "I asked you a question, Michael. How was Paris? Did you enjoy your romantic vacation with Natalie?" He stumbled backward as if I had physically pushed him. "Sarah, I can explain," he started, his voice shaking. "It's not what you think. Let me explain everything." I held up my hand to stop him, and then I walked over to the dining room table where I had laid out some of the evidence. I picked up a stack of the printed emails and the photographs that David had taken. I walked back to Michael and held them out to him. "Go ahead," I said. "Explain these. Explain the 6 months of emails. Explain the romantic dinners and the hotel room. Explain why you used vacation days that you told me you were saving for us to spend a week in Paris with your girlfriend." Michael took the papers with trembling hands, his eyes scanning over them with growing horror. I could see the exact moment when he realized how much I knew, how completely caught he was. There would be no talking his way out of this, no convincing me that I had misunderstood, or that it wasn't as bad as it looked. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. He sank down onto the stairs, still holding the papers, his entire body seeming to collapse in on itself. "Sarah, please," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just happened." Those words, that pathetic excuse, made something inside me snap. "It just happened?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. "Relationships don't just happen, Michael. You made choices. Every single day for 6 months, you made the choice to betray me. You chose to lie to me. You chose to use our money to take another woman on vacation. You chose to write to her about how she's your soulmate while I was here at home, being faithful to you, loving you, planning surprises for you. None of this just happened. You made it happen." Michael looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort him. Nothing but cold satisfaction that he was finally experiencing some consequences for his actions. "I love you, Sarah," he said desperately. "I know I made terrible mistakes, but I love you. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. Please don't throw away 7 years of marriage." I laughed then, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "You already threw it away," I told him. "You threw it away every time you texted her, every time you kissed her, every time you lied to me." Michael stood up from the stairs, the papers still clutched in his hands, and tried to approach me again. "Sarah, please, just listen to me for a minute. I can end things with Natalie right now. I'll call her and tell her it's over. You're my wife, you're the one I married, and I want to make this work. Please give me a chance to fix this." His words sounded rehearsed, desperate, like he had been preparing for this moment during his entire flight home. But there was something hollow about them, something that told me he was more afraid of losing his comfortable life than he was of losing me specifically. I crossed my arms and looked at him with all the coldness I could muster. "You want to fix this? Tell me, Michael, when exactly were you planning to end it with Natalie? Before or after you bought her an engagement ring?" I saw his face go pale again, and I knew that the photograph of them at the jewelry store had hit its mark. "Yes, I know about that too. I know about everything. I have a complete record of your affair, every email, every text message, every photograph. There's nothing you can tell me that I don't already know." He looked genuinely shocked now, realizing just how thoroughly I had investigated his betrayal. Who told you?" he stammered, and I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out where he had made his mistake, where his carefully constructed lies had fallen apart. I smiled grimly. "Does it matter? The point is that I know. I know that you've been lying to me for 6 months. I know that you told me you were going to London when you were really in Paris. I know that you've been planning a future with another woman while pretending to be a devoted husband. And most importantly, I know that our marriage is over. Those last words seemed to hit him harder than anything else I had said. No, he said, shaking his head violently. No, Sarah, don't say that. Our marriage isn't over unless you decide it's over. I'm begging you, please don't give up on us. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but people can come back from this. We can rebuild the trust. I'll do anything you want, go to therapy, answer any questions, give you access to all my accounts. Just please don't end our marriage. His voice broke on the last sentence, and tears started running down his cheeks. I had imagined this moment so many times over the past few days. I had pictured Michael crying and begging, and I had wondered how I would feel when I saw him broken like this. Part of me had thought I might feel satisfaction or vindication, but instead I just felt empty. This man who I had loved for so long, who I had built a life with, who I had trusted completely, was now a stranger to me. The tears on his face didn't move me because I no longer believed anything he said or did. How could I trust that his remorse was genuine when everything else about him had been a lie? You want to know what really hurts, Michael? I said quietly. It's not just that you cheated on me. It's that you made me feel crazy for the past 6 months. Every time I noticed you were distant or distracted, you made me feel like I was being paranoid or insecure. Every time I asked about your day or your trips, you looked me in the eye and lied without hesitation. You let me plan our future while you were actively destroying it. You made a fool of me, and that's something I can never forgive. Michael wiped his face with the back of his hand and took a step toward me. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. It started as just a friendship, and then it became something more, and I didn't know how to stop it. I was confused and scared, and I handled everything in the worst possible way. But Sarah, you have to believe me when I say that I do love you. What I have with Natalie, it's not real. It's just an escape, a fantasy. You're my real life. You're my home. His words might have meant something if I hadn't read his emails to Natalie, where he said exactly the same things about her. I walked to the window and looked out at the street, needing to put some physical distance between us. Do you know what Emma told me when she first called? I asked, not turning around. She said you looked comfortable together, too comfortable. She said you were sleeping with your head on Natalie's shoulder and she was stroking your hair. That's not what confusion looks like, Michael. That's what intimacy looks like. That's what people in love look like. I heard him make a choked sound behind me, but I continued. I saw the photographs from Paris. I saw you holding her hand, kissing her, looking at her the way you used to look at me. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was just some mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. There was a long silence, and when Michael finally spoke again, his voice had changed. The desperate pleading was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like resignation. What do you want me to say, Sarah? Yes, I developed feelings for Natalie. Yes, I lied to you repeatedly. Yes, I'm a terrible person who doesn't deserve your forgiveness. Is that what you need to hear? Because it's all true. But it's also true that I don't want to lose you. It's true that the thought of you not being in my life terrifies me, and it's true that I would do anything to make this right if you would just give me the chance. I turned around to face him, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the moment where I would say the words that would officially end our marriage. It's too late, Michael. You can't make this right because there's nothing left to fix. You destroyed what we had, and there's no going back. I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a quick text message. Within seconds, there was a knock at the door. Michael looked confused, glancing between me and the door. "Who is that?" he asked, but I could see in his eyes that he already suspected the answer. I walked past Michael to open the door, and there stood a professional-looking man in a suit, holding a manila envelope. "Sarah Mitchell?" he asked formally, and I nodded. He handed me the envelope, which I immediately passed to Michael. "Michael Mitchell?" the man asked, turning his attention to my husband. Michael nodded slowly, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "You've been served," the man said, and then he turned and walked back to his car, his job complete. I closed the door and turned to face Michael, who was staring at the envelope in his hands as if it might explode. "Open it," I said calmly. Michael's hands shook as he tore open the envelope and pulled out the legal documents inside. I watched as his eyes scanned the first page, watched as the reality of the situation finally sank in completely. "Divorce papers," he whispered, looking up at me with an expression of absolute devastation. "You're actually divorcing me. You already filed." His voice was hollow, all the fight seeming to drain out of him as he realized that this wasn't just a threat or an emotional reaction. This was real, legal, and already in motion. "Did you really think I would just forgive you and move on?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. "Did you think I would be okay with sharing you with another woman? Or that I would wait around while you figured out which one of us you wanted more? I have more self-respect than that, Michael. I deserve better than a husband who lies to me every single day, who builds a whole separate life behind my back, who uses our money and our time to romance another woman. I deserve someone who actually honors the vows they made to me." Michael sank back down onto the stairs, the divorce papers scattered around him. "This is really happening," he said, more to himself than to me. "This is really over." He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "What about everything we've built together? What about our home, our friends, our plans for the future? Are you really willing to throw all of that away?" The audacity of that question, the fact that he was trying to make me feel guilty for ending a marriage that he had already destroyed, made my anger flare up again. "I'm not the one throwing anything away," I said sharply. "You did that when you started your affair with Natalie. You threw away our marriage every single time you chose her over me. Every lie you told, every secret meeting you had, every romantic message you sent to her. Those were all choices you made to end our marriage. I'm just making it official." I walked over to where he sat and looked down at him. "You don't get to play the victim here, Michael. You don't get to act like I'm the one ruining everything. You did this. This is entirely your fault." Michael picked up one of the papers and read through it more carefully. I knew what he was seeing, because Rachel and I had gone over every detail. I was filing on the grounds of adultery, which in our state meant certain advantages for me in the divorce settlement. I was asking for half of all our shared assets, including our house, our savings, and our investments. I was also asking that he be responsible for all legal fees associated with the divorce. Rachel had made sure that the papers were airtight, that there would be no loopholes for Michael to exploit or ways for him to drag out the process unnecessarily. "You're asking for the house," he said, his voice flat. Where am I supposed to go? I felt zero sympathy for him in that moment. "I don't know, Michael, and frankly, I don't care. Maybe you can stay with Natalie. I'm sure she'd be happy to have you now that your affair isn't a secret anymore. Or maybe you can get a hotel room or rent an apartment. That's your problem to solve, not mine." I gestured toward his suitcase, still sitting in the hallway. "You need to pack whatever else you need and leave, tonight. This is my house now, and you're not welcome here anymore." Michael looked around the living room, as if seeing it for the first time, his eyes lingering on the photographs, the furniture, all the physical reminders of the life we had shared. "Can't I at least stay here until I find a place?" he asked. "It's late, and I just got back from a trip. Please, Sarah, just give me a few days to figure things out." I shook my head firmly. "No, I've already changed the locks, and I'm not giving you a new key. You need to leave now, tonight. You can come back tomorrow with a police escort to get the rest of your things, but I want you out of this house within the hour." The finality in my voice seemed to break through his shock. He stood up slowly, gathering the divorce papers and stuffing them back into the envelope. "I need to pack some clothes and personal items," he said quietly. I nodded and followed him upstairs, not because I didn't trust him to take only his own things, but because I wanted to make sure he actually left. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching as he pulled a duffel bag from the closet and started filling it with clothes. His movements were mechanical, like he was on autopilot, his mind clearly somewhere else. As he packed, he kept starting to say things and then stopping, as if he couldn't find the right words. Finally, as he zipped up the bag, he turned to face me. "I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. But Sarah, I need you to know that I never stop loving you. I know that sounds impossible given everything I've done, but it's true. I love you, and I'm going to regret losing you for the rest of my life." I stood there, unmoved by his declaration, Love wasn't just a feeling or a word, it was actions and choices, and his actions had shown me exactly how much his love was worth. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this to me," I said simply. "Real love doesn't involve lying and cheating and betrayal. What you feel isn't love, Michael. It's guilt and fear of being alone and regret that you got caught. But it's not love, because love would have protected what we had, not destroyed it." Michael stood there, holding his duffel bag, looking like he wanted to say more, but I had heard enough. I walked downstairs and waited by the front door, making it clear that this conversation was over. After a few minutes, I heard him coming down the stairs, his footsteps heavy and slow. He stopped at the bottom, looking around the house one more time, as if trying to memorize every detail. Then he walked to where I stood, his suitcase rolling behind him, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Can I at least call you?" he asked. "Can we talk about this more when emotions aren't running so high?" I shook my head. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. All communication needs to go through them from now on. I don't want to hear from you directly." Michael flinched at the coldness in my voice, but he nodded slowly. He reached for the doorknob, then paused. "For what it's worth, Sarah, I really am sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything to you right now, but I needed to say it one more time." I didn't respond, just stood there with my arms crossed, waiting for him to leave. Finally, he opened the door and walked out into the night. I watched as he loaded his bags into his car, watched as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes with his head in his hands, and watched as he finally started the engine and drove away. Only when his taillights disappeared around the corner did I close and lock the door. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by silence, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to completely fall apart. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and sobbed. All the emotions I had been holding back during the confrontation came flooding out. The hurt, the anger, the sense of betrayal, the grief for the life I had thought I would have, all of it hit me at once. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, until there were no more tears left. It felt like something inside me had broken, something fundamental that I didn't know how to fix. After what felt like hours, I picked myself up off the floor and called Rachel. She answered immediately, having been waiting for my call. "He's gone," I told her, my voice hoarse from crying. "It's done." Rachel made sympathetic noises and told me she was proud of me for being so strong. She said that the hard part was over now, that the rest would just be paperwork and logistics. But I knew she was wrong. The hard part wasn't confronting Michael or serving him divorce papers. The hard part was going to be rebuilding my life without him. Emma called shortly after, having heard from Rachel that the confrontation had happened. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I told her the truth, that I felt completely shattered but also strangely relieved. It was like I had been carrying an enormous weight without even realizing it, and now that weight was gone. The uncertainty was over. I knew where I stood, and I could start moving forward, even if I had no idea what that forward path looked like yet. That night, I couldn't bear to sleep in the bed I had shared with Michael, so I made up the guest room and slept there instead. Well, I tried to sleep, but mostly I just lay awake, my mind racing through everything that had happened. I thought about all the moments over the past 6 months that suddenly made sense now. The times Michael had been unusually defensive about his phone. The weekend he claimed he had to go into the office but came home smelling like perfume. The credit card charges at restaurants I had never heard of that he explained away as business dinners. I had ignored all these red flags because I trusted him, because I loved him, because I couldn't imagine that the man I married would be capable of such sustained deception. That was perhaps the hardest thing to accept, that I had been so fundamentally wrong about someone I thought I knew better than anyone. It made me question my own judgment, my ability to read people, my instincts about who deserved my trust. If I could be so completely fooled by Michael, how could I ever trust myself to choose a partner again? The next morning, I woke up early despite having barely slept. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to figure out what to do with my day. It was Saturday, and normally Michael and I would have spent the day together, maybe going to the farmer's market or working in the garden or just lounging around the house. Now I had nothing but empty hours stretching ahead of me. I decided to call my parents and let them know that Michael was gone and that the divorce was officially underway. My mother answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice as soon as she said hello. I told her everything that had happened the night before, about the confrontation and the divorce papers and Michael leaving. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something that surprised me. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I know this hurts more than anything, but you're handling it with such strength and dignity. You're not letting him manipulate you or gaslight you into thinking this is somehow your fault. That takes real courage." Her words made me start crying again, but they were different tears this time. They weren't tears of grief or anger, but tears of relief that I had people in my life who supported me unconditionally. My father got on the phone and echoed my mother's sentiments, adding that if I needed them, they would drive down immediately. I told them I was okay for now, that I just needed some time to process everything, but knowing they were there if I needed them made me feel less alone. After I hung up with my parents, I decided to take action rather than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I started going through the house, room by room, removing anything that belonged to Michael or reminded me too much of our relationship. Wedding photos came down from the walls, gifts he had given me went into boxes, and clothes he had left behind were piled up near the door. It was therapeutic in a strange way, physically removing Michael from my space. Each item I packed away felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had lost during our marriage. I found his favorite coffee mug, the one I had bought him on our honeymoon, and instead of packing it, I threw it in the trash. It felt petty and satisfying at the same time. I wasn't going to preserve mementos of a relationship that had been built on lies. I wasn't going to keep reminders of a man who had betrayed me so completely. By midday, I had filled 6 large boxes with Michael's belongings. I stacked them neatly in the garage, ready for him to collect when he came back with the police escort. As I worked, my phone kept buzzing with messages. Some were from friends who had heard about the divorce and wanted to offer support. Others were from Michael, long, rambling texts apologizing and begging for another chance. I didn't respond to any of his messages. I had meant what I said about all communication going through lawyers, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me with words anymore. Rachel stopped by in the afternoon with lunch and a bottle of wine. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had been standing when Emma first called with the news about Michael's affair, and we talked about the next steps in the divorce process. Rachel explained that Michael would have 30 days to respond to the divorce filing, and that we would likely need to go through mediation to divide our assets. She was confident that given the evidence of his adultery, the settlement would be favorable to me. The house would likely be mine, along with a significant portion of our savings. "How are you really doing?" Rachel asked, setting aside the legal talk for a moment and looking at me with concern. I thought about how to answer that question honestly. "I feel like I'm grieving someone who's still alive," I told her. "The Michael I thought I knew, the man I fell in love with and married, he's gone. Maybe he never really existed in the first place, and I'm mourning the loss of that person, the loss of the future we were supposed to have together, the loss of the life I thought I was building. But at the same time, I feel angry and betrayed and stupid for not seeing the truth sooner." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not stupid. You're trusting, and there's a difference. Michael is the one who should feel stupid for throwing away a marriage to a woman like you, for some affair that probably won't even last now that it's not a secret anymore." Her words made me feel slightly better, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I should have known, that there must have been signs I missed or warning signals I ignored. Rachel seemed to read my mind. "Stop blaming yourself. This is 100% on him. He made the choices that destroyed your marriage, not you." Over the following days, I slowly started to rebuild some sense of normalcy. I went back to work, though it was difficult to focus when my personal life was in such chaos. My coworkers had heard about the divorce through the office grapevine, and they were sympathetic but also curious. I appreciated their support, but hated feeling like I was the object of gossip and pity. I kept my head down, focused on my work, and tried not to think about the fact that Michael was probably telling his own version of events to his coworkers, painting himself as the victim, or making excuses for his behavior. Emma flew back into town specifically to spend time with me. We went out for dinner at my favorite restaurant, and for a few hours I was able to forget about the divorce and just enjoy my sister's company. She told me funny stories about difficult passengers and challenging flights, and I told her about the small victories in my day-to-day life, like successfully changing the locks and packing up all of Michael's things without having a complete breakdown. It felt good to laugh again, to remember that there was more to life than the pain I was currently experiencing. "You're going to get through this," Emma said as we finished our meal. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but one day you're going to wake up and realize that you haven't thought about Michael in hours, maybe even in days. And then you'll meet someone who actually deserves you, someone who will be faithful and honest and treat you the way you should have been treated all along. This isn't the end of your story, Sarah. It's just the end of a chapter, and the next chapter is going to be so much better." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard to imagine ever trusting anyone enough to open my heart again. Michael had taught me that even people you think you know completely can be hiding enormous secrets. How could I ever let my guard down with someone new, knowing what I now knew about how easily people could deceive the ones they claimed to love? Emma seemed to sense my skepticism. "I'm not saying you have to rush into anything," she clarified. "Take all the time you need to heal, but don't let Michael's betrayal make you cynical or closed off. There are good people out there, faithful people who actually honor their commitments. Don't let him take that hope away from you." Michael continued to text me occasionally, though less frequently as the days went by. His messages had shifted from desperate apologies to practical questions about the divorce proceedings, to eventually just sad, resigned acceptance. I never responded. My lawyer communicated with his lawyer, and slowly the machinery of divorce ground forward. Michael had hired his own attorney and was apparently fighting some of the terms of the settlement, particularly the division of the house. Rachel assured me that his objections wouldn't hold up given the circumstances, but it still frustrated me that he was making this process more difficult than it needed to be. One evening, about 3 weeks after I had kicked Michael out, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when I realized something important. I was okay. Not happy exactly, not healed or over what had happened, but okay. I had survived the worst of it, the initial shock and devastation and grief, and I was still standing. I had a home, a job, family and friends who loved me, and most importantly, I had my self-respect. I had handled the situation with dignity and strength, and I hadn't let Michael's betrayal destroy me. I thought about the woman I had been 3 weeks ago, standing in the kitchen, stirring soup, and planning a romantic surprise for her husband, completely unaware that her life was about to fall apart. That woman seemed like a different person now, someone naive and trusting, who believed that love was enough to protect a marriage. The woman I was now understood that love required more than feelings. It required honesty, commitment, loyalty, and respect. Michael hadn't loved me, not really, not in the way that mattered. He had loved the idea of me, the comfort and stability I provided, but he hadn't loved me enough to be faithful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I made a promise to myself. I would heal from this. I would rebuild my life. I would learn to trust again, maybe not immediately, but eventually. And most importantly, I would never again settle for less than I deserved. I would never again ignore red flags or make excuses for someone's behavior or doubt my own instincts. Michael's betrayal had taught me a painful but valuable lesson about the importance of self-worth and the danger of loving someone more than you love yourself. The divorce would be finalized in a few months. Michael would move on with Natalie, or maybe he wouldn't, and honestly, it didn't matter to me either way. His choices were no longer my concern. I had my own life to rebuild, my own happiness to pursue, and my own future to create. And as I sat there in the fading light, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Not for reconciliation or for things to go back to the way they were, but hope for something new, something better, something that would be built on honesty and trust and genuine love. My pilot sister had spotted my husband in business class to Paris, traveling with another woman, and that discovery had destroyed my marriage. But it had also freed me from a relationship that was already broken, even if I hadn't known it at the time. Emma had done me a favor by telling me the truth, painful as it was. And now, as I moved forward into an uncertain but possibility-filled future, I was grateful. Grateful for the truth, grateful for my strength, and grateful for the chance to start over and build the life I actually deserved.